Hello and welcome to another episode of the Integrator. Today we have Miriam and Eyad to discuss on MENA IT spending and the impact of generative AI in this region. So let me start by asking you, Miriam. So how will global IT spending trends evolve in the near future, and what are the key priorities for Middle East organizations in 2024?
Okay, so the current forecast we have, the most up-to-date one, is Gartner's second quarter 23. And we looked at our forecast in 2022 and we looked at actually what happened and we've synced them up. And in order for us to understand what the priorities are right now and in the future, we need to actually take a step back to go forward. So let's pan back to 2020 and the pandemic. And at the height of the pandemic, governments and businesses really accelerated their spend on digital infrastructure, particularly to make online services available, both for consumers, but also, if you think about it, from the perspective of labor and the workforce for remote access. And as 2022 went along and we came to 2021, they began to realize that they needed to look what was going to happen post-pandemic, with the creation of new marketplaces, new value for their consumers. So what would be their expectations? When we got into 2021 and as we went into 2022, there was a lot of noise in the market. It was very frantic because businesses and governments were having to respond to some very huge disruptive changes. We're referring here to the Russia war in Ukraine, the prices of commodities going up, energy prices going up, supply chain constraints, and so on. So companies and governments started to look at how they would tackle streamlining of their operations to bring the costs down. Now this became worse as we got into the second half of 2022, where we had the cost of living crisis because of very, very high inflation in many parts of the world. There was a squeeze on the labor. The labor markets were very hot, but IT skills were very scarce. And we also had supply chain constraints. So because of all of these things, rather than spending their money on huge digital business transformation efforts, and I believe there was some fatigue about that, they started to put the money more into streamlining operations, basically through the convergence of IoT and automation, robotics, things like that. As we came into 2023, the noise on the things lessened a bit. There's still things going on in the background, but the inflation in some parts of the world are sort of controlled. So now what we're seeing is it's almost like businesses and governments have time and space to think about what to do next. And so we moved from revenue growth in 2020, 2021 to the focus on streamlining operations in 2022. And now we've come to the realization that companies really need to defend and enlarge their margins for profitability. So that's where we are. So when we look at the Gartner second quarter 23 forecast for IT enterprise spending, we are forecasting a figure of $4.7 trillion US dollars, and that's an up of 4.4% US dollars growth. It sort of converts to something like 6.4% constant currency because we have to adjust for exchange mechanisms, the fluctuations in the exchange rate. If we look at the MENA spending, that is projected to rise 4%.
So with that, let me ask you, Eyad, so what factors are hindering the investments in generative AI? I see ChatGPT has consumerized AI to a lot of extent, and business organizations are very familiar in sort of AI as a word. So what's hindering the investments in that?
Absolutely. So there's definitely a big focus and attention on generative AI in the region, and there's also very good momentum. Now, when it comes to potential barriers, it really depends on the type of use cases organizations they're trying to pursue. So if you take use cases that are more focused on productivity improvement, so maybe someone from the organization is trying to use ChatGPT as an example to come up with the job description for a software engineer, or try to come up with a better subject line for a marketing email. These type of everyday productivity use cases, there might be less barriers in terms of adoption. It's very important for organizations to be aware about the limitation and the risks that comes with using these capabilities, like potential biases in the output, accuracy, privacy concerns, etc. Now, if you move to other type of use cases, the use cases that are more focused in terms of driving differentiation for the organizations, those type of use cases require more complex implementation. So that might be requiring prompt engineering or maybe build a custom model. Now, for these type of use cases, there are different type of barriers and complications, starting with the type of skills needed. So you need specific type of skills in terms of prompt engineers, data scientists, AI experts. Those type of expertise are on a high demand in the region, but very low supply. So accessibility to these type of skills is what could be a potential barrier. Another one is the cost of pursuing these use cases. So it depends again on how you're planning to pursue it. So for example, if you're pursuing building a custom model, only very few organizations, they have the resources to be able to build these custom models. So cost is high, and it's not only the cost of implementation. You need to keep in mind the cost of implementation, cost of training, and how to maintain these specific capabilities. So cost is another big factor. So in summary, it really depends on the use case, but I would say between awareness of the current limitation and the risk of using these capabilities, talent, potential barriers, and also cost. But despite these barriers, what we're seeing here in the region, there is a big focus and support to drive this forward. So for example, the Artificial Intelligence, Digital Economy, and Remote Work Application Office released Generative AI guide to empower government leaders on how to use these capabilities in the region. Not only government leaders, also private entity can use this guide to drive, providing them examples of use cases and key consideration to effectively use generative AI. Also recently, G42 announced that they created their bi-modal large language model, JACE. So we see big steps happening in the region towards driving the adoption and to try to overcome some of these barriers.
Miriam, one other thing I would like to ask you on the adoption of shift to cloud, I would say. So what is your outlook on the adoption of cloud services in the region and its impact on the IT spending?
So we see the cloud adoption and spend on cloud computing services is going to increase as time goes on. Some of it is due to what Eyad was talking there about generative AI and AI services, the conversions of automation and IoT, for example. And as we see more spend on cloud adoption, we're going to see data monetization services go up as well. So we're seeing spend on data centers, that's going to go up. And we're also going to see spend on services and IT services, professional services, and on software as well. So we expect that to go up. Now that's from the demand side. From the supply side, we've seen lots of hyperscalers come into the region. So we have SAP, for example, with agreements in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, AWS in Bahrain, and a tie-up with the Kuwait Ministry of Commerce. We see Google, I think, just entered into Qatar. And so we see these the reason why these hyperscalers are coming in is to sort of meet the demand that they're actually seeing. So that's, I think, why we're going to see a lot of spend in the cloud area.
So I get that. Just one quick thing I want to ask you on that. What is with the data centers and how do you see that growth in that with that regard?
Well, because of all the large infrastructure projects that we have. So let me give you an example. If we look at the government spending, especially if we look at the GCC, not just the GCC, but even if we look at some countries, like for example in Egypt, where they're starting to do a lot of projects on sustainability, let's say, that's going to require a lot of cloud storage, a lot of cloud processing. So for that, you need actually data centers. So we will see lots and lots more data centers being built. But of course, that's going to have an impact on sustainability.
Yes. So before coming to sustainability, let me ask Eyad on that note. So which industries in the region are expected to increase the greatest impact from generative AI, and any percentage of adoption for conversational AI in 2024?
Absolutely. If you think about the different industries, so let's take a step back and see what are the most common use cases that we currently see most organizations are pursuing. I would say the first most common use case is content generation, be it text generation, images, videos, sound, whatever that is. So if this is one of the most common use cases that being pursued, so we expect big impact on industries like media, entertainment. If we move to the second most common use case that also we see is engagement with stakeholders. These stakeholders can be customers, can be citizens, in terms of providing capabilities like chatbot with generative AI capabilities that provides more personalized interactions with these stakeholders. So for that case study, we see potential big impact in terms of government services. DEWA early on this year, they confirmed that they are piloting ChatGPT with their chatbot Ramas on their website. And also we see big move in this specific area. Also, can impact other industries like healthcare, financial services, etc. The third most common use case that also we're seeing pursued is technology use, using it by software engineers to help them to create codes, testing, etc. I would say this is more of a horizontal use case. The impact of generative AI really depends on the use case and the industry.
Yes.
But in general, we see big positive potential impact on media, entertainment, financial services, government, and healthcare. Just to give you a flavor of potential adoption, so Gartner predicts by 2024, 40% of enterprise applications will include conversational AI capability. Contrast that with the initial 5% current state in 2020. So we're expecting big adoption of conversational AI in the enterprise applications capabilities.
Yes, we can see that with Microsoft coming into this picture of AI and so on. So a lot of boom going to happen in that part right there. So one more thing I wanted to, so should organizations consider crafting AI policies moving forward?
Absolutely. The fact is, most likely employees are already using it.
Yes.
They're using it within their organization for experimentation, or maybe to help them to do some of the tasks required by their jobs. So to avoid shadow use of this specific technologies, organization, they should create policies that guide the use of this specific technology. Now, it's very important when you think about the policy creation not to overcomplicate it. Just try to simplify the policy, try to provide guidance in terms of what are the do's and the don'ts. So for example, the don'ts don't include personal data. Of course, don't include any sensitive or IP data related to the organization. In terms of the do's, maybe if you're using any capability like OpenAI, ChatGPT, switch off the history option, etc. So it's very important to provide the guidance because most likely your employees are already using it.
Yes, very true. Employees are already using it. So with that, let me ask you, Miriam, on sustainability. It's COP28 is going to happen here. So how are MENA organization in general looking at sustainability concerns in this region?
Yeah, so you're right. It's COP28 is going to happen in the UAE and COP27 happened in Egypt. Yes. So in this particular region, there's a very high, intense look at all things sustainability, both from governments and also from the private sector. So if you look at what's happening in the governments, many of the governments, and even in the private sector, many companies and governments have come out with their net zero carbon promises and statements. Yes. We see governments, for example, funding agricultural projects to go with the sustainability. So if we look at Saudi Arabia's Reef project, they are in the business of using modern technology and sustainable ways of growing things to become higher self-service in certain areas. Like, for example, dairy, honey, dates, coffee production, all of these things. They've raised the levels of their own self-service, meaning they don't have to rely so much on products coming in from outside. And they're doing that through modern technology, but keeping it sustainable as well. Okay, so those are on the government side. Even on the public-private side, so we have public-private collaborations, for example, green financing, that's a big one. So you see the sovereign wealth funds, Mubadala, for example, has opened an ESG division that purely looks at green financing. Egypt is issuing green bonds for renewable energy, for example. So we have those kinds of public-private things going on. And then, of course, in the private sector. So, for example, if we look at some of the fintechs. So MENA fintechs have come to some arrangement with the UAE sort of tech startups and the UAE government to be much more sustainable in the things that they do. Banks, if you look at HSBC, you look at Standard Chartered, I believe Standard Chartered have something which says that they will only deal with companies and businesses that have their energy that are less than 5% from thermal heat going forward. Even if you look at the aviation sector, Emirates and Etihad, for example, looking at cleaner aviation fuels, less aircraft noise. So we see both in the public sector and in the private sector a lot of attempts at sustainability. If we look at the tech sector, then we have to start the discussion back where we were before, talking about the increase of data centers.
Yes. Yes.
So here we see a lot of things going on. Again, public-private partnerships, where we're talking right from first principles, meaning the design of the buildings, so that they are constructed with sustainable, friendly materials. They maximize the amount of light. The ways in which the data centers are cooled, so for example, to not use so much water consumption, to use adiabatic cooling techniques, for example. the way in which you use renewable energy. So there's lots of things that are going on now, and I do believe that even the move towards edge computing is helping because you can actually have smaller data centers when you do that. So these are some of the ways in which we see both public sector and private sector working towards a more sustainable future.
A lot of organizations moving to cloud. Hope
Yes.
data centers too, in terms
Yes.
of sustainability goes better. And one more thing to add, what is the impact of AI, and what are the environmental perils that is making it for the future? So how do you find generative AI and in terms of sustainability? What angle do you have to say on that?
In our conversations with leaders, what we're seeing is that they're expecting more of positive impact on generative AI compared to the potential risk of this specific technology. When we say positive impact, is more that the focus on enabling new customer experiences, driving revenue growth, cost efficiencies, etc. And those positive impacts is all about the use cases that you're trying to pursue. What's very important for leaders is to be realistic about the potential impact of the use cases that they're pursuing. So for example, you might be pursuing a use case that can help improve the productivity of your employees. But with the current limitation and potential errors and accuracy issues with the content that's being generated, potential biases, maybe these content that being generated might take more time of your employees to correct compared if they're doing it themselves. That's why, to maximize the impact of any use case you're pursuing, Gartner recommends that you need to define KPIs to track the before and after of the use cases that you're pursuing in terms of what's the impact generated based on the goal for these specific use cases. Recently, we've surveyed around 2,500 executives to see where they are guiding their investment and the focus of generative AI use cases. What we found from the data is that the number one focus is on customer experience, so customer citizen experience, driven by growth and then efficiency. Looking at the priorities of the region, I'm expecting similar priorities as well. So there will be a big focus on first driving improvement in customer or citizen experience, driving by also growth potential impact. So that's in terms of impact. In terms of sustainability, of course, this technology consumes a lot of energy. Yes, that's true.
Yes.
But it's all about the decisions from the leaders in terms of how they use that technology. So there are multiple aspects. One, Mem spoke about the different best practices in terms of how we can optimize the energy use. So there are different best practices when it comes, how can we use this technology in a way that we optimize the energy consumption. But at the same time, also, there are a lot of potential of generative AI in driving sustainability goals. For example, you can use this specific technology to help you understand regulations, mandates, directions, type of reporting that you need to provide, and also suggest action plans that can help you to deliver on these specific mandates and the goals. So when it comes to sustainability, it's all about optimizing the use of energy that will be powering this specific technology, and really trying to prioritize use cases that enable sustainability goals.
Looking ahead to 2024, are there any concerns regarding MENA IT spending, or what should organizations look into in terms of spending on IT?
So for 2024, we expect to see more spending on data centers. We expect to see more spending on software and more spending on IT services. And both for governments and for the private sector, we expect to see spend increasing on AI. We've just talked a lot about generative AI, but AI in general. And not just isolated spending on AI, but convergence of AI with IoT and automation capabilities. So that you want to actually flex that to make sure you get really good value out of the data to sort of impact your revenue stream, but also through the automation and the IoT capabilities to hit at that streamlining of your operational costs. And then, of course, as we've said, we want to make sure we unlock the value of that data to hit our margin concerns. And one of the ways we think that's going to happen is by data monetization services. Because the margins you get on monetizing your data and providing them as a service are much, much higher than you would simply by just selling products. So with that, we will see increased spend on the IT pool that will actually have those services and those capabilities in generative AI, for example. And so professional services like consulting and so on, because at the moment, we're still seeing that scarcity in the IT skills. So I think that's where you'll actually see most of the spend, and those will actually be the priorities that we see. Now, cloud migration, as we've talked about, will continue, and I said earlier, data center spend will continue, simply because we're seeing on the demand side some of the things that the governments and the private sector want to do.
Okay, so a lot of positivity I see that with MENA IT spending in
Yes.
2024. One final question, and how do you see AI evolving in terms of in the MENA region, and what can we see in 2024, even the short span of time with AI?
So this year, I see that the focus is more trying to come up with a story in terms of how we're going to use generative AI specifically. Next year will be all about implementation. But what will really differentiate leaders who will be successful in their implementation from others is really the way that they approach these opportunities. It's very important to note that this is highly hyped technology with big potential. So the way that you need to approach the use cases and the implementation is more with agile mindsets, meaning that it's different from a mature technology that's been around for a time and we tested and we know like very successful use cases when it comes to the implementation. The typical approach of implementation is we write a business case, we plan it, big bang implementation, then we track the ROI. When you think about generative AI, it's more about agile thinking. So you need to think about the proof of value. What's the value expected? You try a proof of concept, a pilot, you learn, you do all the needed adjustment and gradually scale. So it's very important to pursue this specific technology in small, cautious steps, understanding that has big potential for different industries.
So thank you. It was a pleasure talking to Miriam and Eyad on this topic. This topic is very vast, and hopefully we could soon follow it up with another episode later after your MENA IT spending and the report.